¿Ya? Ok. Bueno, buenos días. Muchas gracias a todas.
Good morning. Thanks to you for being here. Thanks to the festival 42 for having such an incredible festival. We have such a lot of activities, and we cannot make it. I'm really in good company. He is a bestseller author, writes in New York Times, has written several series, and he works in all different genres with unique stories, with that have your heart in your mouth. So big round of applause for J. Kristoff. I want to start speaking about the new books coming to Spain, thanks to Umbriel. So thanks, Umbriel, for translating Aurora Rising and Lifelike. Oh, it was high time. I wanted to talk about Lifelike. This novel I like very much, personally. We are in front of a post-apocalyptic society. It takes place in the United States with lots of topics connected to cyberpunks, macro corporations, robots, a shortage of water and food, in Armada, for example, being packed with humans. How was your journey to create this world with their own rules, laws, with foods?
Well, first of all, it's awesome to see you. Thank you for coming. Thanks to Festival 42 for having me, and thanks to the mighty Umbriel for bringing out my new books. That man over there, can everyone give him a round of applause? Leo. Gracias. Now, am I going to give the entire answer and then it will be translated? Is that the plan?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So Lifelike really originated with two separate ideas. The first being the 3 laws of robotics, which were written by Isaac Asimov, very famous science fiction author. The idea being essentially that robots shouldn't do harm to humans, that when we create these machines, they're meant to serve us, and they shouldn't be able to hurt us. And the idea of slavery that's built into the bones of that concept. When you create a living, thinking machine, you're essentially creating a new form of life, and I wanted to explore the morality of creating a caste of organisms or beings that were built to serve, and the inherent injustice of that idea. And the second inspiration for the book was really the novel Pinocchio. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the story of Pinocchio, but there are parallels to Pinocchio throughout the entire Lifelike book. So Cricket, for example, who is Evie's little robot companion, he's inspired by Jiminy Cricket. Like Jiminy Cricket is Pinocchio's moral center. Yeah. Jiminy is reminding Pinocchio of what is right and what is wrong. Cricket kind of serves the same function for Eve in that book. You know, the Leviathan under the water is the sequence in Pinocchio when they get swallowed by the whale. So there's kind of shouts out to Pinocchio throughout the whole book. So yeah, they were the two main inspirations. And then I built all the post-apocalyptic mayhem on top of that.
Perdona, la traducción es...
There's a simultaneous translation, so you can speak freely. We're speaking on you. So, yes. Yes, we are the translators.
La gente está escuchando.
So people are listening live what you're saying. Yes.
Amazing. All right, I'll talk quicker then.
Todo controlado.
Everything under control. Okay, I know if you agree with me that we live in a cyberpunk society. And one of the reflections that we normally do is that cyberpunk is not a desire, but a place to avoid. What do you think? How long till we have a post-apocalyptic society as Lifelike? How long?
I don't know if it's a certainty. It's absolutely a possibility. The world definitely seems more fractured now than it has ever before, and we have the instruments by which we can destroy ourselves if we allow the evil inherent in human nature to rule our heads. I hope it's not a certitude. Hopefully wiser heads will prevail, but we're in pretty turbulent times right now. I'm sure everyone will agree. And we're facing a collision between the technologies that we've created and the societies that we've built. And those technologies seem, at least to my mind, to be having an adverse effect on the structures of society. You know, the advent of social media, for example, has led to more division in the world in which we live than pretty much any technology that I can imagine. And that was our first brush with artificial intelligence, because essentially the algorithms at the heart of social media, the reasons why you get recommended the things that you're recommended in your Twitter feed and your YouTube recommendations, is all driven by algorithmic technology, machine learning. It's essentially artificial intelligence. And the second wave of artificial intelligence is on the horizon now with the advent of technologies like ChatGPT and Midjourney that are essentially replacing a lot of work that was traditionally considered part of the human experience, the creation of art, for example. The idea that illustrators can no longer make a living by illustrating is not science fiction anymore, it's reality. We invented these machines that were supposed to remove the drudgery from human existence, that were supposed to take away the boring jobs and leave us to do all the cool jobs. But in actual fact, the machines are taking away the cool jobs and just leaving us with the drudgery. So we're in the second stage of what is essentially a battle against artificial intelligence with the advent of machine learning. And we're still not really understanding the fallout of our first battle with artificial intelligence, which is the rise of algorithmic representation and recommendation on social media. So it's a scary place, and we're creating machines that we don't really understand. And we're not really being driven by moral thought, we're being driven by the acquisition of wealth, by capitalism. The acquisition of money is the driving goal. So it's a scary place.
Yeah. Creo que fantasear.
Sorry. You've read my books, you know I write about dark things.
No. Como dices,
As you said, AI is a reality, is a fact, it's not a fiction, it's just in our daily lives. And of course, this generates lots of controversy. If you're heading in the near future where robots will be more developed, which kind of robot or which robot would you like to live together? Not the author J. Kristoff, but the daily Kristoff, the person Kristoff. You would like more a service robot, or you want more an intelligence like the 100, that are a bit more humanish?
Probably not, no. I think the idea of imbuing machines with intelligence is a very dangerous and slippery slope.
Yeah.
It's very hard for us to know where those technologies lead, and they're not being created with government oversight. They're being developed by companies on the forefront of technological development with nobody looking over their shoulder actually asking them, do you think we should release this technology into the wild without doing a little bit more testing first? But that's not to say there aren't amazing things that can be done through robotic technology. For example, if we invented a machine that could capture carbon from the atmosphere, apparently some young technologist has developed a machine that can remove plastics from the ocean. So if we could do that at scale and remove all the plastics out of the ocean that we have dumped in over the last 100 years, that's an extraordinary thing. That's only good for the planet and humanity in general. So I don't want to be all doom and gloom. There's wonderful things, you know, nanotechnology that could conduct surgery inside your body without having to perform an incision. You just inject a robot through a tube and it goes and removes the blockage in the valve in your heart. We're not that far away from that kind of technology, and that's an incredible advancement that's going to save untold lives. So we can do extraordinary things with them, but the scary thing is the companies who are developing them are not doing so with anything other than profit in mind. They don't make any secret of that. They're motivated by money, not by altruism. And when you're motivated by money, bad things can happen. Oh, excuse me. Did I lose?
Hello. In the book, you talk about the three corporations. are all devoted to different objectives and all want to do research, but I think that they have something in common with real corporation. They are not concerned about the consequences of their doing. For example, biomass research. I love Biomass Incorporated that want to experiment with living organisms. Even them, they're just devastating everything. If the protagonists live in a place full of waste of biomass, actually, do you think this is the way we're heading to, or maybe we're already there in this future dominated by macro corporation that just don't care a bit about the death or the waste that they are leaving behind?
It's certainly a possibility. It depends. It depends if the better angels of our nature will prevail. You know, the world that I have built in Lifelike is one. It was the product of a calamity. It was unrestrained technological development, unrestrained proliferation of nuclear weapons, and that led to a disaster. Yeah. But ultimately, Lifelike is a story about the characters in the world that I built. As long as there is life, there is hope, is kind of the message that I'm hopefully building into the bones of what can be a pretty depressing structure. But yeah, in terms of where humanity can go, I think we are definitely at a crossroads. We are unfortunately in a position where we have Paleolithic brains, like our brains developed back when we weren't even really humans, and a lot of the trigger points in our brains and the way we perceive the world and the way we react are systems that developed, you know, when we were hunter-gatherers living on the plains of the African savannah. So for example, we all have a thing in our brain called negativity bias. We prioritize in our minds the things that make us angry and the things that make us afraid more than the things that make us happy. And when you're living on the plains of the African savannah, that makes perfect sense because your brain should prioritize the part of the rivers where the lions drink as opposed to remembering the part of the river where the pretty flowers grow. Because if you prioritize the second piece of information, you just get eaten by the lions. So it makes sense for our brains to evolve that way, but unfortunately they haven't evolved beyond that point. And so now you have a system like social media where all the information that is being fed to you, because these companies want you to engage longer with your screens, all the information that they've figured out that keeps you engaged with your machines longer is information that makes you angry and information that makes you afraid. And so when you check into Twitter, your feed is full of horrible things and horrible people doing horrible things to each other.
Yeah.
So our brains are still Paleolithic. Our government systems are medieval, basically. The systems that govern our world, the structures that we have put in place, haven't really evolved much since the medieval ages. But the technology that we're developing is godlike. It's unrestrained. It is taking us to places that we can't even really envisage. We're on the cutting edge of developing technology, and we're like a locomotive driving down a track, but we're literally putting down the track in front of us as we drive. And we're not actually stopping and looking at the direction that the track is headed. We're just putting down track as fast as we can, because if we don't, then the other company will, and the other company makes all the money. So yeah, we live in scary times, is the point. But hopefully, Lifelike and Aurora and all of my books are about humans, about people, recognizing the dangers of the world that they live in, and ideas like love and family and hope and light and justice winning through, even though the systems that are put in place and the worlds that they're living in can be pretty scary. I think it's within all of us to make a positive difference in the world.
Hay esperanza al final en tus libros.
So at the end, there's some hope in your books?
Hopefully, yeah. Hopefully, I feel like I'm being very depressing up here. Apologies, but yeah, hopefully that's the message in all of my work, that people can make a difference. Ultimately, we're living in big, scary times, but it comes down to each of us to put light and love back into the world.
In Lifelike, and lots of your books, they're characters that morally gray. Maybe you're not empathize exactly 100% to what they do, but you understand somehow why they're doing. And in this sense, as a robot, the robots in the hundreds, do you think that you are on the side of your villains?
I like villains, yeah.
We like villains.
I love villains. They're always the most interesting. I mean, Lifelike is really a trilogy about the formation of a villain. One of the main inspirations I had for the dynamic between Evie and Lemon is Professor X and Magneto from the X-Men. Kind of two people who come from similar backgrounds and start with the same intentions, but just through their own personal experiences get driven into totally different directions. They can understand why each of them think the way they do, but they simply can't agree. They've tried and tried again, and they're just different people. So yeah, Lifelike is really, in part, about, it's the genesis of a villain. It's understanding how good people can go bad and how terrible things can drive you to become a terrible person. But yeah, like I say, ultimately my books are all about people overcoming those adversities and rising above the challenges that life throw at them. So the third book isn't out yet, so you'll have to see how it ends. But yeah, that was kind of one of the main ideas, was one of my ambitions in that trilogy, to explore the genesis of the villain and understand why people become worse versions of themselves.
Lo estás haciendo muy bien porque creo que muchos...
You're doing super well because we love your villains. We all love your villains.
They're my faves.
De hecho,
I wanted to ask you, characters in your books, which is the questionable moral, your favorite villain with a questionable morality.
That I wrote, my villain?
yeah. Sorry.
It's tough. I mean, I don't know if you would call her a villain. I probably would. I think Mia is kind of a villain. She's not a good person. She's certainly not nice. She's not kind. She's vindictive and vain and mean. And she kills people for money. So most people would consider her a villain. But I love her. She's pretty awesome. So I'll go with Mia for now.
Creo que...
I think that a lot of the public will agree with you.
Noches, have you guys read that? Yeah? Yeah?
Nunca noche.
Oh, no. Did I pronounce that wrong? How is it pronounced?
¿Cómo es?
Nunca noche.
Nunca noche.
Bienvenidos. Muchachos. That's all I got.
Hay otro de tus personajes.
Another of your characters, the border of good and bad, or more towards evil, which is Aiden, which is intelligence artificial of Illumini, the series you wrote with Annie Kaufman. And it's also a villain, but it's a villain that despite everything, you can understand why he's acting like that. Could you elaborate a bit on this character, Ada? Because I like her very much.
Yeah, actually, I'll change my mind. Aiden is my favorite villain. But Aiden is actually a villain.
Yeah.
Mia's, like,
Aiden
in
is
theory,
amazing.
she's the hero, but Aiden is a villain. Yeah, Aiden was an exploration of binary thinking, the idea of an absolutist mindset. So Aiden, for those of you who haven't read it, Aiden is an artificial intelligence that runs a battleship, a spaceship. And it's a computer and it thinks in binary terms. So if it was presented with a moral quandary in which 100 people died versus 99 people dying, it would always choose 99 people dying because mathematically that's just better. Statistically, it's logical choice to make.
Yeah.
But if those 99 people are 80 years old, and the 100 people are children, newborn children, then morally speaking, that's wrong. But in Aiden's point of view, morality doesn't really come into the equation. It's purely computational, it's purely mathematical. At least that's where it starts. And then it's damaged in a firefight and it starts to think about things in more human terms. And over the course of the trilogy, it kind of discovers what it is to care about another human being and think in less absolutist terms, in black and white terms. So yeah, Aiden was kind of an exploration in the idea of absolute morality, the idea that there is always a right and there is always a wrong, that there is no shade of grey.
Yeah.
Because in a statistical sense that is true, but as soon as those statistics collide with real life, you start to bring real people into the equation, real experiences, then things get grey very quickly. So it was cool putting a villain that saw things in absolute terms against this kind of huge human drama. And yeah, Aiden was a lot of fun to write. Aiden, it allowed me to bring some of my graphic design skills into writing as well. I studied to be a graphic designer in college. And for those of you who haven't read the book, Aiden is kind of a god's eye view of what is happening aboard this spaceship. But because it's damaged, the way it perceives events kind of plays out on the page. So we do a bunch of experimentation with typography. So for example, when it's describing spaceships flying, like fighters fighting each other, then the typography kind of weaves and rolls around the page the same way the spaceships do as they're flying through space. So it was a really cool artistic exercise as well as a writing
¿La
exercise.
hiciste tú?
So it's yours. So the graphic design is yours.
Yeah.
Es increíble.
Oh, thanks.
Amazing, amazing.
We were writing it on a deadline, and it was leading into production very quickly. So it was easier for me to just do it myself in Photoshop and send it to our publisher rather than try and brief the designer and then have changes running back and forth. So in the first book, a lot of the design elements are mine, and then the second and third were taken over by the publisher.
Bueno, a nosotras solo nos ha llegado el primero a España de momento.
We've only have the first in Spain still, so but we'll see.
We have good news for you.
Perdón.
Are you announcing something?
And it might be good news, that's all I'm saying.
Okay. Lo siento al sector editorial.
I'm sorry for the publishers if he said made him say something that he shouldn't. So sorry. Okay, let's go back to Lifeline.
I have a cool story. The making of Illuminator.
Please.
It's actually in the second book. There is someone, one of the characters is an artist, and she illustrates in a journal. And you see pages of the journal throughout the book, and there's a bullet hole in the bottom right-hand corner. And as you read further and further into the book, the bullet hole gets bigger, and then there's a blood stain, and the blood stain gets bigger. So it's kind of implying that whoever was carrying the journal at the time got shot. And so one of the notes that I sent to our designer in America was, you know, I don't know where you're going to get a bullet hole. Maybe you could take a book out into the woods because you're a gun. You're Americans, you guys have guns. And you can just shoot the book and take a photo of it. And then, sure enough, a couple of weeks later, I got sent a photo of our graphic designer named Heather, who's like this tiny little lady with a gun as big as she was.
Wow.
And she took a book out into her grandfather's farm and shot it with a rifle and then scanned in the pages of the book. So yeah, Americans.
Estamos unidos.
We are united.
Sorry if anyone here is American.
No pasa nada.
You're
Estamos
crazy,
entre amigos.
It's okay. We are among friends.
Volviendo un poco al
So, going back to Lifelike and all of your books, I realize that you always make references to the Bible. The Bible is always there. They lived in Babel. The names of robots are angels. Also, you use Christian symbols. However, there is always a presence of the church that it's very distorted and very obscure and dark. Therefore, there is a lot of fascination of the church images, but also you try to be critical against church. Tell us about it.
I was raised Catholic. I went to an all-boys Catholic school. Turned out very well, as you can see. Yeah, I mean, even as a child, I didn't quite agree with everything that I was being told, and I could see some of the illogic in some of the world building of the Catholic Church, let's put it that way. And yeah, I kind of grew up questioning it as an early age, but it's part of who I am and it's part of my family. So I like to explore the imagery and the parables and the messages behind it. You know, it's certainly not all bad. Religion as a concept is not inherently harmful, but the problem is when corrupt people collide with religious ideals and use those ideals to manipulate other people. I think human history is kind of replete with examples of that, and it's not just Catholicism and Christianity, it's pretty much any organized religion. You know, my distrust of the people behind those organizations bleeds into the work. There's nothing inherently wrong with the concepts of Christianity or Judaism or Islam or anything. It's when corrupt people collide with those ideals and manipulate other people through them that I take objection to it.
A mí personalmente.
Well, personally, I'd like this approach that you give to this perspective. You can keep going.
Luego también te quería comentar que
I would also like to comment on something. In some of your books, the humor, the sense of humor, it's very agile, very subtle, and it gives loads of dynamism to the stories and the narrative. You can offer loads of charisma to the main characters. I had a blast and I laughed a lot. It's very complicated to convey this sense of humor when writing, right? So I'd like to know what part of J. Kristoff it's humor, your personal humor, or maybe you like the sense of humor of a very specific, well-known writer or comedian. How do you work humor? Because you are very sharp.
I'm glad, thank you. And it's cool to know that those jokes translate, because it can be quite difficult conceptually to move from English to another language, so I'm glad the humor comes across. In terms of my favorite comedians, man, Bill Hicks is a huge one. George Carlin is another one. Richard Pryor, contemporary. I like John Mulaney. Do you guys like John Mulaney? Do you know who John Mulaney is? No? All right, you should go and watch John Mulaney's special on Netflix. He's amazing. Dave Chappelle. But yeah, in terms of the way that I write, I find humor is a really good way to endear a character to the reader. I'm sure we all know that guy who's not all that good looking, but he has an amazingly good looking girlfriend, and the reason he has an amazing girlfriend is because he makes her laugh, because he's funny. Being around funny people brightens our spirits and endears us to them immediately. So I try and do the same thing in my book. If a character can make you laugh, even in a scary situation, it relieves the tension but also endears you to them as a reader. So yeah, I'm really glad that it translates, because it can be difficult for some of the concepts that I'm talking about to translate to other languages. I think I bring an Australian sensibility to my writing in that respect. Australians we tend to be self-deprecating, so we make fun of ourselves. You don't want to be seen to have too much of an ego in Australia. We have this thing called tall poppy syndrome. I don't know if that even translates in Spanish, but the idea that the poppy that grows too big gets cut down. Like if the flower grows too tall in a field of flowers, the tall flower stands out and people cut it down. That's a pretty Australian point of view. So the way Australians try and get around that is we make fun of ourselves. We poke fun at each other. So a lot of that bleeds into what my characters do as well.
Okay. No quería perder la oportunidad de...
I'd like to take advantage to comment on something, the role of the vampire. I love vampires, I must tell you.
Es una de las figuras que más...
It's one of the figures that has been explored in cinema, movies, and literature. I'd like to know, have you ever tried, or maybe your purpose and your goal was to look for something new when dealing with vampires, or were you more centered to talk about story, putting in the center the traditional vampires, the main features that we already know?
Yes. I wanted to bring old school vampires back. The wonderful thing about vampires in literature is that they've become a bunch of different things to different writers and different people. So in their origin stories, they were monsters. They were unholy and evil, and they fed upon the innocent, and they were something to be fought and something to be feared. But over the course of the last 30, 40 years, they've become anti-heroes, and they've become love interests, and they've become And you know, there's nothing wrong with any of that. Like, I'm a massive fan of the Vampire Diaries. You may not know it to look at me, but I love the Vampire Diaries, like Team Damon for life, for real. Yeah, there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but when I was writing vampires, I wanted to bring them back to the vampires that I grew up with. So they're scary, they're monsters, they're parasites who feed upon innocent people, they're a manifestation of the darkness and the primal and the evil in us all, and there's something to be fought and something to be defeated. So I wanted to bring it back to a more old school vibe. I wanted to explore the idea that on a long enough timeline, everything fades away, everything falls apart, including your morality. So, you know, you take anyone in this room, if you kill somebody every night for 400 years to stay alive, you will stop seeing people as people and you will just start seeing them as food. You will think about people the same way that I think about the steak that I'm going to eat for dinner tonight. You don't really see it as a cow. You don't worry that the cow maybe had friends that liked the cow. You don't think about the farmer that raised the cow. It's just a piece of meat and you eat it and you're done. So that idea that on a long enough timeline humanity would just erode is a really interesting idea for me to explore. So that's kind of what my vampires are about. Scary. Bring them back scary.
Yes. Sobre...
Well, as for Aurora Rising, it is a choral novel and from different characters' perspectives. It's one of the translations that we had. Thank you so much. Thank you. It was an amazing translation. And I'd like to know, how do you manage to balance the characters? Because there are loads of characters. They are very different. No one it's more important than the other. And the pace that you have, it's very dynamic. How do you manage to do it?
I mean, there's two of us to start with. So Amy wrote 3 of the characters and I wrote 3 of the characters. So basically, the way Amy and I work is we sit down at a pub. Amy doesn't drink, but I do, so she watches me drink. And about 4 drinks in, then we start talking ideas. And basically, we'll plot about 100 pages in advance and then break up those 100 pages into scenes and figure out which character is the best to see that scene through the eye of.
Okay.
Because you're describing the scene itself, but you're also describing the character's reaction to it. Everything in Aurora is first-person point of view, so you're literally in the character's head, seeing what they see and feeling what they feel. And so it's a matter of figuring out which character would be best to convey the emotions that we're going to convey in this scene, and what do we want to reveal about the characters themselves in the way they react to what we're writing. In terms of how we do that, I don't really know. It could be driven by plot. You know, for example, there's something that important that we need to find out about Aurora in this scene. And so Aurora would be the best person to experience it because we get to feel what she feels when she finds out this secret. And sometimes it's a matter of, okay, it's been 5 chapters and Finian hasn't had a chapter yet, so I guess he's next in line. Because, yeah, like you say, we try and give every character equal weight. We wanted to have every character have a hero moment and every character have a moment where their skill set is the difference between winning and losing. So everyone gets a spotlight, everyone gets a gold star. So, sometimes it's a matter of the emotions we want to convey, and sometimes it's just a matter of who's up in terms of, it's your turn, Finn, so you get a chapter now.
Bueno, como decías...
Well, as you said, Aurora Rising and Illuminate, they've been writing together with Amy, right? And you made an excellent and outstanding work altogether. Everything is so well structured. We cannot see that there are 2 writers. It's amazing. So I'd like to know, how do you make this possible? How everything is so well intertwined? You already talked about it in a nutshell. But what are the main advantages and also the problems when you work together with another writer or when you write solo?
It's an amazing experience. It's a lot like being married. So my wife is here, we've been married for like 20 years, so we get along pretty well, and marriage is great, but I imagine if you marry the wrong person, it's a terrible experience. I would imagine choosing the wrong writing partner would be similar. So you really have to be careful in choosing somebody who brings talents to the table that you don't have and sees the world differently than you do, but also kind of has the same love and the same passion of the work that you're building. So Amy and I were really lucky. We started out as friends. We were buddies before we started writing together. And one day she had a dream that we wrote a book together, and it was a book written entirely in email format. She couldn't remember what the book was about, but she remembered that it was two people emailing back and forth. And that's how we started writing Illuminate together. We were friends who began working together. In terms of, it's a bit of a cliche, but it is true when they say two heads are better than one. When you're writing a book alone, if you're up against the wall, if there's a problem that you can't solve, then sometimes it's a matter of you just sitting there by yourself being miserable for days and days and days before you think of a solution. Whereas if you're working with a co-author, there's someone right there that you can ask. You can bounce ideas off and they can tell you if you're on the right track or if you're being silly or whatever. So you're getting immediate feedback, which is great. Often as an author, you're writing in vacuum and you have the door closed and you don't really get a sense of whether the thing you're making is good and bad. That's not internal until you get to show it to somebody, maybe 9-10 months from now. Whereas when you're writing with a co-author, you're bouncing ideas off each other all the time. You're sending chapters back and forth all the time. So it's this really wonderful feedback loop of creativity where your co-author will write something amazing and they'll think of this really cool idea and you read it and you get excited and then you bring your own excitement to the thing that you write next. There's a fairy story, I don't know if you guys have it, it's called The Shoemaker and the Elves. Are you familiar with this fairy story? It's like a guy runs a shoe store and there are elves living in it in his basement and he leaves out leather overnight and when he wakes up in the morning, the elves have made it into shoes. Being a co-author is kind of like that. Like you write your chapter and you send it off in email and then you wake up the next day and you open up your email and there's more book in there that wasn't there the night before. It's like magic. There's, a new chapter got added to your book and you didn't have to do anything. It's great. So yeah, if you find the right partner, it's an incredibly rewarding experience. Amy and I have never had a fight. We've never had an argument. Like we've disagreed about things, about the way the story should end, for example. We had a disagreement on the way that the Illuminate trilogy should end. I wanted to kill everybody and she didn't, basically. But even though we had very different ideas about the way the story should end, we both respected each other's opinions. So we just sat down and had a conversation about it and threw in the pros and the cons and the way we felt and we reached a resolution. So as long as you're approaching it with respect and understanding that your partner, even though they might see the game differently, they want the book to be the best book that it can possibly be. As long as you keep that in mind, then yeah, you can overcome any minor disagreements. So yeah, she's amazing. I love her. She's like my sister.
¿Trabajas con...
I think that you work with the plots and genres and styles that are very, very different. Do you have any specific ritual that you have when you face a fantasy plot or science fiction plot? Difference in your rituals? Do you do things differently? Do you have writing rituals?
Yeah, so when I'm writing alone, I treat it like a job, basically. I'm lucky enough to get to do this full time now, thanks to all you wonderful readers for buying my books, because I get to do it for a living. And I treat it like a job. Like I get up at 9 o'clock and I sit down at my desk and I write. Yeah, even if I don't feel like it that day, even if I'm not inspired. I'm a big believer in the idea that you can fix a broken car. You can't fix a car that doesn't exist. So even if you write something that's bad, you can turn something that's bad into something that's good. You can't turn something that doesn't exist into anything because it doesn't exist. So I treat it like a job. I kind of sit down and write every day. I work 6 days a week. I try and get 2,000 words done a day. Sometimes it happens and sometimes that doesn't. So yeah, I guess that is a ritual. I treat it like you guys would treat your job, because if I don't write books, I don't get to keep the lights on in my house. But in terms of when I'm writing with Amy, like I say, we would get together in the same place. It was usually a pub, and we would chat about the next 100 pages. We found that if we proceeded any more than 100 pages, inevitably someone would think of a cool idea, about page 50, and that would change everything. And so all the work that we did plotting page 180 would just get thrown out the window because we thought of something cooler. So we figured out about 100 pages was the sweet spot. And yeah, we just sit together and bounce ideas back and forth off each other. It's kind of like a brainstorming session, I guess. And then we'll divide up the 100 pages into chapters, and we'll each go away and work on our respective bits. Mm-hmm. So it's a very different experience writing collaboratively rather than writing solo. I listen to movie soundtracks when I'm writing. Theatrical scores, because that kind of music is written to instill a certain amount of emotion. So if you listen to music that was written for an action scene while you're writing an action scene, you'll kind of get pumped up by it. If you're writing something sad, then you listen to sad music, and that makes the writing a little bit sadder. So I always have music on in the background, but never music with lyrics. The words get in the way of the words in my head, so it has to just be orchestral pieces usually, and movie soundtracks are really cool for that. Amazing. That's about it. I take a break at 3 o'clock to walk my dog.
Es necesario descansar también.
I think it's always important to have a break, otherwise...
Definitely.
Me comentan que desgraciadamente...
Well, unfortunately, time flies. Do we have a question from the audience? Now it's the moment. Now or never.
Hi.
Hello, where are you?
Hello. Yeah.
Oh, hi.
I want to ask you about writing, and since you've written about vampire, science fiction, steampunk, you've written with another person, I want to ask what's the most important thing as a writer that you have learned, or if you have any advice to any writer who is starting on writing.
Yeah, sure. One of the best techniques I got taught when I was a young writer, this is going to sound strange, but never finish a writing session by finishing a sentence. So always leave a sentence half finished. So, Jay walked into the room and then you stop writing and you go away. And when you come back the next day, you won't sit there wondering what happens next because you finished the sentence and all of a sudden you're writing again. So one of the things that you can find difficult when you're first starting out is getting motivated and the idea of what happens next. So it sounds weird, but try it. Like leave a sentence unfinished, and that way when you sit down next day to write, you finish the sentence, and all of a sudden you're writing again. So it's just a little brain hack to get your brain working. In terms of the internet is full of writing advice. I would be wary of anybody who says there's only one way to do something, that there's a golden rule, there's an absolute way you must write. Any way you're writing that gets you a book finished at the end of the day is the right way for you to write, and every writer is different. But the one thing that I will say is a golden rule is kind of what I was saying before. Finish the book. Just finish the book. It doesn't matter if the book is bad. You can make a bad book good. You can go back and fix the broken car. You can't fix the car that doesn't exist. So don't be afraid to suck. Give yourself permission to write badly, because bad writing can become good writing. It's just a matter of rewriting. But if you're worried about writing badly, then you may not write at all. So give yourself permission to be bad, finish the book, and then fix the book. That's the only golden rule I have, really. Anything else, every writer is different. But keep it up, because it's an amazing thing to do with your free time. The idea that you're creating a world and building a character and telling a story that only you can tell is genuinely a kind of magic. So good for you, and I hope you have all the success in the world.
Súper buen consejo, ¿eh?
What a great piece of recommendation. I note it down. More questions? Yes, I'd like to ask you something. Can I ask in Spanish? Okay. All right. All right, I'd like to ask about the Empire of Vampires. Once you read the book, little by little, you see loads of references that you can recognize, whether from the movies and from other novels as well. So it's great to see Castlevania and Go, the Guard of the Night, and all the Christianity references that you talked about. Therefore, I ask myself, is this a very conscious decision? Do you sit in front of the book, I'm going to write a novel of vampires, and this comes from your personal background? Or we know each other very well, we share these images, so let's celebrate all these references and to create something. I don't know if it was clear enough.
I think I know what you mean. Yeah, I mean, I'm drawing, like I said, when I wrote my vampires, I'm drawing on the vampires that I grew up with as a little kid, being inspired by both the real life folklore and the stories that grew out of the folklore, that, you know, all the storytellers that I loved as a young reader brought into my life. So I'm inspired by the mythology as well as the mythology that we have created built on top of the mythology. But yeah, I think it's fun to kind of throw in references. I throw in little references all the time, not only to the stories that I've read and the writers that I've loved, but the bands that I'm listening to at the time, or a movie that I've watched, or sometimes even friends of mine get thrown in there, and there's only one person in the world who reads it, gets the reference. But yeah, I try and allow myself and my experience to bleed into the worlds that I'm creating, regardless of whether they're vampires or science fiction or whatever. I think it's important for an artist to let a little bit of yourself bleed into the work that you're creating. I hope that makes sense. I hope that answers the question.
Tenemos tiempo.
Do we have time for a final question? Who dares to ask last question?
Okay. Now I'm scared. Anyway, one of the things that stands out in your books is how you use a lot of meta-narrative elements. For example, in Mia's story, we're actually reading from another narrator, or in The Empire of the Vampire, Gabriel is narrating his story, and he's narrating kind of different timelines at the same time. How do you choose which devices to put into your work? How do you choose whether it's literally just the point of view, or let's make it through this narrator?
Yeah, sure. It's a matter of experimentation. Usually when I'm starting to write a book, I'll do a bunch of free-form writing. So I will just sit down and write without thinking consciously. It's kind of stream of conscious, while I'm trying to discover the character and their voice. And it's usually at that stage that I'll decide what kind of point of view that I'm going to write from. But it can be a narrative device as well. So, for example, Gabriel telling his story to his captors, one of the questions that I'm hoping underpins the entire narrative that he's telling is this guy even telling the truth? Like, you're only hearing the story from his point of view, and he's literally telling the people who he hates what happened in his life. So how much of it is he actually being truthful about? And in the second book, Empire of the Damned, a second narrator actually gets introduced in the book that hopefully casts some doubt on everything that Gabriel has told you up to that point. So in that sense, choosing first-person point of view narrative was a conscious effort for me to prompt that question in the reader's mind. Like, is this guy being truthful? Is everything that you're being told actually what happened? So it can depend. It can be a choice in terms of the mood that I'm trying to evoke, or the frame that I'm trying to place on the story, or the question that I'm trying to provoke in the reader's head. So every book is different, and my goal when writing every book is different. So, for example, in Aurora, we're using first-person perspective because there was a lot of characters in the narrative, and first-person point of view gives you a really intimate idea of who this character is. You're literally in their head and hearing what they're thinking and seeing what they're thinking. So you very quickly get an understanding of who a character is in first. And because there was lots of characters to get to know, we decided that would be the best and quickest way to introduce this big cast. So it can be a mechanical choice as well as just a feeling. Sometimes it just feels right. Nevernight felt right to write in a third-person omniscient narrator point of view. I didn't even know who the narrator was when I started writing Nevernight. I had no idea who was telling that story. I didn't decide until halfway through book 2 who it actually was. So sometimes, yeah, I'm not as clever as maybe as I appear.
¿Una más rápida?
Just a very quick one. No time. No, just a piece of news, or what are you working with right now? Tell us. What's your project today? Maybe something new. Tell us.
I'm currently writing the third part of Empire of the Vampire. So the second part comes out, Empire of the Damned comes out next year in the States and the UK. I'm not sure what the release in Spain is, but I'm finishing off the third part, and I have already sold in 2 new projects that we'll be talking about very soon, and they're really exciting, but I can't talk about them yet.
Okay.
And there's stuff happening. I got some really cool news today on TV. So that's all I'll say. But there's cool stuff happening behind the scenes as well. So it's really exciting. But I want to say thank you to all of you. Thank you to all my readers in Spain. It's really cool to come to a country where you don't speak the language and see that your words have had an impact, and the stories that you've created and the characters that you've created mean something to people. So for everyone out there who has read my books, to my wonderful publishers, to everyone at Festival 42, I want to say thanks, because yeah, showing up to a room full of people when you travel halfway around the world, it's incredible, and I cannot thank you all enough for the support that you've shown. So gracias, muchachos.